He was 14 years old when a group of boys at his school cornered him at the top of a concrete staircase, beat him until he couldn't recognize his own face in a mirror, and threw him down the stairs. He woke up in a hospital. That kid grew up to become the most watched man on Earth. Not by accident, by choice. And that's the part nobody really explains. Because here's the question that should bother you. How does a boy who was mocked, isolated, and physically broken by other kids grow up to need billions of eyes on him every single day for the rest of his life? You'd think it would go the other way. You'd think a kid like that disappears, gets small, stays quiet. Instead, he bought a social media platform for $44 billion just to make sure he'd never have to be quiet again. So what happened in between? Let's go back. Pretoria, South Africa, the late 1970s. Elon Musk is a strange kid. Smart in a way that isolates you, the kind of smart where you correct adults and they don't like it. He reads constantly, encyclopedias, science fiction. He later said he'd sometimes go so deep into a book he'd become legally blind to the world around him. He wouldn't hear people talking to him, not because he was ignoring them, because he genuinely wasn't there. Now, a kid like that, in a South African schoolyard in the 70s. That's not endearing. That's a target. He didn't fit in. He didn't want the things other boys wanted, and kids can smell that difference the way sharks smell blood in water. So they went after him, for years. At home, it wasn't much softer. His parents split when he was young, and in an unusual decision, he chose to live with his father, not his mother. He said, in interviews years later, that he thought his father would be lonely otherwise. A kid, choosing to sacrifice his own comfort to manage someone else's emotions. That's worth sitting with for a second. Because that instinct, noticing pain around you and stepping in to absorb it, doesn't just disappear when you grow up. It becomes a pattern. And by most accounts, including Musk's own, that household was not a safe one. He's described his father as a source of intense psychological strain, words designed to cut, not comfort. His father has disputed how he's been portrayed. We can't fully verify what happened behind closed doors, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. But we do know how the boy who lived through it turned out, isolated at school, unsettled at home. So where does a kid like that go? He goes inward. He builds a world in his head that nobody else can touch. That's the part people miss. The books, the science fiction, the space operas. That wasn't a hobby. That was an exit. A place where the rules made sense, where intelligence was rewarded instead of punished, where a lonely kid could imagine himself as the hero instead of the target. Years later, Musk would say something that sounds almost too tidy to be true, except it lines up with everything else. That reading those stories as a kid gave him a kind of existential dread, a fear that humanity might just end, go extinct. And that fear, sitting in the mind of a bullied 12-year-old with nothing but books for company, didn't fade with age. It became the operating system underneath everything he'd eventually build. But here's the twist. That inner world only solves half the problem. It gives you a reason to exist. It doesn't give you a way to be seen. And that's the part of Musk that took decades to surface. In 2021, on live television, in front of millions of people, Musk said something that reframed his entire life. He said he has Asperger's, a form of autism, not as an excuse, as a fact. Think about what that means for a kid growing up in the world we just described. Social cues that come naturally to other children don't come naturally to you. You miss things. You say the wrong thing at the wrong time. Other kids notice, and they don't forgive it. Kids rarely do. So the bullying isn't just random cruelty. It's targeted at the exact thing he couldn't control. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because a lot of people with that experience spend their whole lives trying to become invisible. Trying to blend in so far that nobody ever gets close enough to hurt them again. Musk did the opposite. He made himself the single most visible human being of his generation. And once you see it that way, so much of his adult behavior stops looking random and starts looking like a strategy. The memes, the late-night tweets, the public feuds, the jokes that land badly, the willingness to say the exact thing everyone else is too careful to say. It's not that he doesn't understand the reaction he's going to get. It's that he's decided the reaction doesn't get to hurt him anymore. There's a psychological idea here worth borrowing, simplified. Pain you can't predict is terrifying. Pain you choose, on your own terms, is something else entirely. It's control. A kid getting thrown down a staircase has no control. A grown man tweeting something outrageous, knowing exactly how many people are about to be furious with him, that man has all the control. He's not hoping to avoid the attack this time, he's initiating it. And an attack you start yourself doesn't feel like the same wound. That's the trade Musk seems to have made with himself, whether he'd describe it that way or not. Invisibility once meant safety failed him anyway. He was still found, still hurt, even hiding inside a book. So he stopped hiding. If the world was going to look at him no matter what, he decided he would be the one aiming the spotlight. Buying Twitter, now X, for $44 billion is, on paper, a business decision. But look at it psychologically, and it starts to look like something closer to a 12-year-old finally getting his hands on the microphone that the entire schoolyard used to control. Now nobody gets to decide the narrative about him except him. And maybe that's the real engine underneath everything. Not just the platform, but the rockets, the cars, the constant, almost frantic need to be building something new before the last thing is even finished. Because if he ever stops, even for a moment, he has to sit still. And sitting still, for that particular kid, was never safe. So he doesn't stop. He can't really afford to. Here's the uncomfortable truth this story leaves us with. We tend to think visibility is what confident people chase. But sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes the loudest person in the room isn't the one who feels safest being seen. He's the one who learned a long time ago that being unseen never protected him at all. The boy at the bottom of that staircase didn't grow up to avoid the world's attention. He grew up to own it. And maybe that's the quiet, uncomfortable question this story leaves you with. Not about him, but about anyone you've ever judged for needing to be seen. What are they actually running from?